Okay, so girls, your next topic in internal control is going to be your test control. Okay, now what is this test control? Is basically here the auditor tests the control of the company that has actually been set up for sales. Okay, for the sales cycle, in order to determine how strong and reliable they are. Okay, he's going to test the sales cycle for the company to see whether how strong they are going to be and how reliable they are going to be. Okay, now if they are strong, what happens here is basically, if they are strong, the auditor can reduce the amount of transaction. Okay, he can reduce the amount of transaction for the testing that he must do. There'll be various testings which will be done for each and every transactions, right? So if it is a very strong enough, so the transaction testing can be reduced. But whereas, okay, now here you also have to know that common internal controls over the sales cycle include numbered sales. Okay, in sales you include invoices. Okay, then you also take into consideration your purchase order authorization over a certain limit and authorization over receivables and write-offs. Okay, now next you also in this you also have your auditor. What he's going to do here is basically he's going to select a random sample of the transaction and he is going to examine all of this. He's also taking into consideration the related purchase order, what the invoices are which are similar to it, and the customer statements. Okay, if the control being tested is numbered sales invoices, for example, let me state the example for you all. The auditor ensures that all numbers in a sections are accounted for and that none are missing. Okay, he is ensuring that all the numbers in this section are taken into consideration. They are all accounted. Okay, they are all accounted and none of the numbers are missing. So you should make sure while you're auditing, you're not missing out on any information. You're taking into consideration each and every information. Okay, now next you also have okay, now you also have next topic you have testing for sales system. Now what is this testing for sales system? Under this you have, for many businesses sales are made on credit, right? And the objective for sales cycle includes control debtors as well. So when you're doing sales on a credit basis, you're controlling the debtor as well. So what are the objectives? What are the objective that it actually includes is basically your control objectives as to how you're going to control control the sales which are made on credit basis, and also the sales which include the debtors. You're going to control the credit basis on which you're purchasing, and also you're controlling your debtors. Okay, these control objectives will basically include a few. Okay, so now you have to take into consideration, you have to authorize the customer's orders, and you should also control and record these orders to execute these orders promptly. Then once the goods are shipped and work completely, this should be controlled. Once you ship the goods, the order should be controlled to ensure that invoices are issued and revenue is recorded for all sales. Whatever you are selling, whatever you are doing, you have to maintain a record of all of this. Okay, then goods return. Okay, now goods return and claims by customers should be controlled in order to determine the liability of goods returned and claim. In some cases it so happens that once you purchase something, for example, you take online shopping. Okay, you're purchasing something from Flipkart. Suppose you're purchasing a pouch, a pencil pouch for that matter. Now you're not satisfied with the product which is coming back, but they've already recorded the transaction that this good is being shipped and they're recording it, right? You've received the order, they've proceeded with the order, and they're making sure you're getting this particular order, but at times you're not satisfied with the particular thing, so you are returning. So all of this also will be taken into consideration, and all of this information also has to be recorded in case if you're returning also. Next, invoices and credit should be appropriately checked for the accuracy and authorized before being entered into the books. Okay, now you should also check what are the invoices, sales invoice, purchase invoice, and all of the credits should be appropriately checked. You should keep continuously checking. Okay, and you should see whether it is accurate, whether you have supporting documents to it, whether this transaction or this entry is actually occurred, whether the sale has actually happened, and you have to authorize it before actually entering into the books. Now only authorized customer transactions should be entered. Now what you're doing here is basically control procedure over sales and debtors. Okay, typical control procedures. Okay, at the key stages of the sales cycle. Okay, these are the keys stages at the sales cycle. You have your orders, okay? Once you will receive the order, you will dispatch the order, you will attach, if you receive the order, you will see a invoice which will be attached to it, right? You will see invoice, you will see credit notes, then you will see return inwards, whether you are returning or not returning, receivables, whether you've received, and a bad debt, okay? Now in orders, what you need to know is basically in terms of existing customers. Here, any new customer should be referred to credit control department before the audit is accepted, before the order is accepted, okay? All the orders which are received should also be recorded on the pre-numbered sales order document so that a check can be made that all orders have been dealt with completeness check, okay? You should record each and every order. All the orders should also be authorized before any goods are dispatched. This is in terms of order. Now next, in dispatch, you should know that dispatch note should be authorized before goods leave the company. Okay, before goods are actually leaving the company, it should be well informed. Okay, regular checks should be made to ensure that all dispatches have been invoiced. Okay, all the dispatches have to be invoiced, and also dispatches have to be pre-numbered, and a register has to be maintained for these dispatches. Next, you have invoice and credit notes. In your invoice and credit notes, you have sales. Okay. Now in your invoicing and credit notes, sales invoices should be authorized by responsible official and matched with the authorized order and dispatch note. Okay, it should be done. Now this invoice and credit note should be done only by a responsible official who is appointed for that particular duty, and he should authorize it before dispatching it. Okay, and also you should take into consideration the copies of cancelled invoices should be retained. In case if the invoice is being cancelled, all these copies should be retained. Any cancellation of invoice should lead to cancellation of the related dispatch note. If all the cancellation should have a dispatch note. Okay, you should also pre-number it, and you should continuously check. You should also have a regular check whether these orders have been properly dispatched and these invoices have been properly noted and the credit notes are maintained. Okay, next one, you have returns. In your returns, what is happening? Returns inwards. Any goods which are returned by the customers should again be checked for obvious damage, whether they are actually returning it for a reason. Now what is the reason why they are returning it, whether you have a damage in that particular thing. Okay, and when accepted, a document should be raised. Okay, in case if it has a damage, only then you are accepting it, and only after that you are raising a particular document. Now all goods returned should be used to prepare appropriate credit notes. Now lastly, you have receivables. Now in your receivable, it's basically a receivable ledger. To control the account should be prepared regularly and check to individual sales ledger balances by independent official. Okay, here the independent official is going to check the sales ledger balance. Okay, and he is going to prepare it, and he is going to check it, have a regular check on a regular basis. Now also statements should be sent regularly to the customers, and also you should know that formally this should be carried in a very formal procedure, and it exists also in a formal procedure. So you should continuously keep following up. You should avoid overdue of debts, which should be highlighted either by the preparation of an aged list balances, by preparation of regular customer statements. Okay. Now moving on to your next topic, you have testing of the payroll system. Now what happens in this testing of the payroll system is, you have something known as your control objectives here. Okay, you have control objectives, you have control. Okay, in your control objectives, what you're doing here is basically, this is in terms of wages and salaries only. Control objectives in terms of wages and salaries. So here you're taking into consideration your payment of wages should be made only in respect of the client's authorized employees. You can make payments only to the authorized employees. Payment should be made at authorized rates only. The rates will be set up by the company, or it will be set up by the government. You should pay only according to the authorized rates. Payment should be made in accordance with the work performance, that is time, output, commission on sales. Now what is the time they are dedicating to the work? Now what is the output which is come, and what is the commission on sales? Okay, when you make sure that you're reaching the target of sales, you will receive certain commission and bonus, right? So the payment should be made on that basis also. Payroll and deduction should be calculated accurately. You should also make sure payment should be made to the right employee. Recording of the paid wage should be made correctly along with the deductions shown. Now, what is this deduction? In case if you're not able to meet the sales target, or in case if you're constantly absent in the organization, so all of this, based on taking these aspects into consideration, you will be making a deduction in the wages. Now next you have the control procedure for the wages and salaries. So you have approval and control of documents. Approval and control of documents is basically, it should be written, okay? It should be written authorized to employee or dismissal, okay? Who is an employee who is authorized to it, and in case if you're dismissing any employee. And also you should take into consideration change in rates of pay should be authorized in writing by official outside the wages department. Now in case if you're making any changes in the department, so you should also make sure that you're writing it down, okay? Then overtime, okay, in case if the employee is working overtime, all this should be authorized once, and this also has to be recorded. Independent official should review the payroll and he should also sign it. There should be constantly a review of this payroll system, and in case if there are changes, it should be recorded and it should be authorized. And the person who's appointed for it should also sign it, okay? Okay, and when you're giving out wages, the wage check should be signed by 2 signatories and agreed with the signed payroll. Okay, now the person who's giving you the wage should also sign it, and the person who's receiving the wage also should sign it. Now next one, you're moving on to the next thing in your procedure is arithmetical accuracy. In your arithmetical accuracy, you should ensure that you have proper payroll, and this should be properly checked from the clock cards or the job cards, okay? And a sample checked for accuracy against the current rates of pay. What is the current rate of pay, and whether you are actually paying according to that particular rate. And payroll detail should also be checked for the accurate calculation of deductions. Now these deductions can also include your tax, your social security, pensions, trade unions, subscriptions, etc. Okay. Next, you have control accounts. What happens in your control accounts is basically it should be maintained in respect of each deductions. So as you're all studying income tax, you'll know what is deductions and what are the different deductions which will be taken into consideration in terms of salaries and wages. Now these deductions should show amounts which are paid periodically to the inland revenue and to the trade unions, okay? And you should also make sure that management should exercise overall review and control. And also you should take into consideration overall analytical checks that has to be carried out to highlight major discrepancies. You should make sure that you are carrying out the regular checks to avoid any discrepancies and avoid any stoppage in the work. For example, you have check against budgets. You should this check against budget is you should make sure the person who is appointed should continuously check in the budget whether the budget is sufficient, whether you require any other amount which is to be involved in the budget, if the budget amount has to be increased, whether the budget which has been appointed is utilized appropriately or not. Now next, you have access to assets and records. Now access to assets and records is basically you should know that payment should be made only by check or either by cash, and this payment will be directly transferred into the employee's bank account. If the employee is paid in form of cash, then the payment will be made in the following procedure, okay? Now in case if you're making payment in cash, you should take into consideration this procedure. Employees should sign for their wages. So for example, there is employer and employee. This employer is giving 100 rupees, so there will be a record which will be maintained which suppose for example your name is Raju, okay? So your name will be written in the ledger. Your name will be written in the record. Next to it, your sign will be there. A signature column will be there, wherein you have to say received 100 rupees and you have to sign it. Now employees should be allowed to take wage for another employee. So for example, if Raju has a friend called Rakesh, Rakesh cannot take the wages for Raju. Raju only has to take his wages, sign and take his wages. Now when wages are claimed later, the employee should sign for the wage packet and release of the packet should be authorized, okay? He should sign for it. Only after he signs, the authorized person will release the package. Now, wage department should also preferably be a separate department. As we all have various departments like human resource, finance, accounts, everything. For the salaries also, you should have a separate department. Okay, you should have a separate department so that it's easy for the employees. Now next, moving on to the next topic, you have test of control wages and salaries. Testing of control wages and salaries include your testing of cash system, your testing of purchases system. Okay, you have various systems that need to be purchased. Now, what is this testing of the cash system? Okay, when you're testing of to give a slight introduction on your testing of control wages and salaries, it is basically you're testing the sample of timesheets and other records, okay, for approval by responsible official. So when you're issuing of wages and salaries, you should ensure that there is a responsible official who is giving an authorization that you can actually issue this wages. Okay, you should examine evidence of checking of payroll calculations. Now, when you you always calculate your wages and payrolls, right? You should also have evidences that these payrolls are calculated appropriately and effectively. Once the person is done with the calculation, you should make sure that he is signing in you are personally signing, and also you are getting a sign of the financial controller. You are getting it checked from the financial controller, and also you are getting it signed to avoid any errors. Okay, you should also inspect the payroll reconciliation. You should examine explanations for payroll expense variances, and also you should test controls over unclaimed wages. Now, moving on to your next topic, you have testing the cash system. What is this testing cash system? Okay, first one, you take into consideration your control objective. Your control objective here, the control of cash is clearly, now cash is the most important asset of any organization. As we all know, finance is the lifeblood of any business activities, and without finance, no organization can survive, right? So the control of cash is clearly of prime importance in any business or organization. Okay, cash is an important asset to any organization. Now, what you have to do here is basically what are the objectives you need to take into consideration are all sums due to the company are received and subsequently accounted for. Now, suppose if the company has made any delivered any order, you should make sure that they have received the payment for it, and you are accounting for it, and you are entering that particular delivery into the records. Once you receive the payment, you are entering into the records. All receipts and payments are promptly and accurately recorded. You should record all the receipts and payments accurately. Now, cash systems are also referred to as check, receipts and payments. Okay, business should also try as much as possible to conduct all their cash transactions by means of checks or other forms of bank transfers. Now, usually the companies will either pay you through cash, or they will transfer the amount to your bank account, and through this they have to maintain control. Next, you have the testing the purchases system. Now, what happens in testing what is happening in testing the purchases system is basically what is the control objective here is basically purchases are often made on credit, and so purchases cycles, as we all know, purchases are usually made on the credit basis, and the purchase cycle will include the following payables, that is purchase goods or services or ordered under proper authority and using proper procedures. Okay, you are ordering under proper authority and using the proper procedure to order this. You should also take into consideration purchased goods and services are not only ordered as necessary but for the proper conduct of business operations and are ordered for suitable and approved suppliers. Okay, you cannot always go and supply for each and every person. You should make sure that this particular supplier is appropriate, and you should make sure that they are suitable. You should also ensure that why are they purchasing it, and to see whether they are prompt supply buyers or not. Now next, you have Okay, you should also only necessary goods and services are ordered, right? Now, goods and services received should be inspected for quality and quantity description. You before actually go proceeding with it, you should also provide for the inspection of the quality and the quantity. You should give the description of what is the quality of the product and what will be the quantity of it. Okay, then invoices are related to and related documents are checked properly before the items are accepted. You should make sure that the invoices are properly checked before they are actually accepted. Now, all the valid transactions relating to the paid purchases should be recorded immediately and accurately. Okay. Moving on to the next one, you have the control procedure over the purchase and payable. In this first one, you have order. That is, for order, you should make sure that you have requisition notes for purchases should be authorized. Okay, whatever notes for requisition are there, it has to be authorized, and you should make sure that all orders should be authorized by the responsible official whose authority limit should be predefined. Now, whatever his authority is, you should predefine it, and you should make sure that only this responsible person is taking this activity into consideration. Now, for example, you have various items, okay, that is capital expenditure, which needs to be authorized at an appropriate level, possibly by the board of directors. Okay, but as we all know, there is a hierarchy which has been followed in the organization, and based on this hierarchy, various people will be assigned with various tasks, and based on this particular task, they will take into consideration their authority and they will authorize it. Now, once you receive the order, you should also make sure that you are retaining the copies of order as a method of following up by late deliveries by supplier. In case if there is a late delivery by supplier, you can retain this particular copies. Now, what is this reorder level is basically once you reach up to now you have different levels in your ordering also. Okay. Now, reorder level is basically once the order level falls down your minimum level. Suppose your minimum level is 6. That is the time when you need to reorder all the inventories for a particular organization. Now, next you have receipt of goods. Okay, receipts of goods is nothing but here the goods inwards area should be identified to deal with the receipt of all goods. Okay, and all the goods should be checked for their quality, for their quantity, and all the entire description about the product has to be given. Now, why are we doing this receipt of goods? For example, let me give you an example of any cream. For example, you have a Pond's cream, right? So when you're purchasing the Pond's cream, the quantity will be mentioned, what is the quality, whether it is standardized by whether it has an ISI mark, okay, what is the price of it, and what is the description, what is it going to benefit, how is it going to benefit you, and what is the usage, everything will be mentioned, right? So this will all come under the receipt of goods. Now you have invoicing and returns. Okay, this invoicing and returns is basically purchase invoices should be stamped with approval grid and even given a unique serial number to ensure purchases invoices don't go astray. You should make sure that each and every purchase invoice is given a different number. Suppose you have 4 as your main heading. Okay, now you under your subheadings you will have 4.1, 4.2, so that you're not losing in track of these particular purchases invoice. Now, purchases invoice should also be matched with the goods received notes, and company orders should not be processed until they are not matching these particular purchase invoice and the goods received notes. You should also make sure these invoices are properly allocated to nominal ledger accounts by allocating expenditure codes. A portion of such coding should be checked independently. And also you should make sure that a record of goods returned to should be kept and checked to all credit notes which are received from the suppliers. Okay, all the records have to be properly maintained for your future references. Now next you have purchase ledger and suppliers. In your purchase ledger and suppliers, what is happening here is basically a payable, you have something known as a purchase ledger. In your purchase ledger, you have a payable ledger account, and this account should be maintained. And this account should be maintained and regularly checked against the balances in the purchase ledger by an independent official. Okay. And this payable ledger should also be kept by persons independent of receiving of goods, invoice authorization and payment routines. Now, statements from suppliers should also be checked against the ledger account. So there will be a person who will be an independent official who will be appointed for this particular thing, and he will be checking what if the account is maintained properly, if their balances are maintained and recorded properly, and also if they are receiving the goods invoices, and whether the payment is happening in a routine basis, whether the statements from suppliers are received, and when the statement from suppliers are received, you should continuously check against the ledger account. Okay. Now next, let's move on to your next topic, that is testing the non-current asset. Now testing the non-current asset. So moving on to your next topic, you have testing the non-current assets. Now in your testing of non-current assets, you have something known as your current assets as well as your non-current assets. So your non-current assets will include intangible assets, your deferred expenses, etc. Okay. So in this objective is basically the asset should be, non-current asset should be recorded correctly, it should be secured, and it should be maintained. And also the acquisition and disposal of the assets should be authorized. This should be authorized by the independent person who's been appointed. You should also ensure that the acquisition and disposal of assets are for the most favorable price possible. It is not for a higher or a very low price. It should be for the favorable price. These non-current assets are properly recorded and depreciated accordingly. Okay. Now what is the procedure over the non-current assets? Basically here, budget should be prepared by someone who is directly associated. So by someone in the sense, it is the independent person who will be directly associated to the board of directors. If the budget is accepted, it should be agreed by all the board of directors in a meeting. Okay. For example, you have to, we all know where our country's budget and our state's budget will be prepared, right? It will only be approved if everyone are agreeing for it. So similarly, it is with the company's budget also. The top management, once they prepare the budget, the top management has to approve for this particular budget. Next, you have expenditure and estimate cost of any non-current assets to be replaced. Okay, in case if there are any cost or estimated cost, it has to be replaced. Also, a document should show what is to be acquired and signed. You should show as to what is the particular document, what has to be acquired in it, and where the authorized person has to sign. Okay. Non-current assets manufactured or constructed by the company itself should be separately identified in the costing records of the company, which should reflect the direct cost and the relevant cost. Okay, whatever the non-current assets are, whether it is manufactured or constructed by the company itself, it should be separately identified in the record, in the costing records. Okay, there will be a separate record which will be a costing records of the company, which should reflect the direct cost and the relevant cost. What is the cost which is directly is coming into existence, and what are the relevant costs. A register of non-current assets should be maintained. Each item of the asset should be recognized and the details of the same should be given. Now also a physical inspection of the assets and the register should be carried out periodically. Okay, you should make sure that there is a physical inspection of the assets. What are the assets in the organization? These assets should be physically inspected and your register should be maintained and it should be carried out periodically. Moving on to your next point, you have the level of asset that should be properly maintained and insured adequately. You should also ensure depreciation should be authorized and written statement of policy which is produced. Okay, now depreciation will be different based on the wear and tear which is being done of a particular asset. Based on that, you should have a written statement of a policy which is produced. Depreciation should be reviewed annually to identify the need for the change. Okay, whether suppose the depreciation amount which is being set is example 20% for different assets. For plant it is different. For plant and machinery it is 15. Suppose it is 20%. For land and building it is 15%. So you should see whether it has to be reviewed and changed annually. Calculation of depreciation should be checked accurately and also it should be checked continuously. Now next you have your testing of the inventory control. Now, how you're going to test the inventory control is basically, although the inventory control may vary from the client to client, these controls will remain the same in all cases. You will have to authorize the purchase procedure, authorization, and what is the purchase procedure. This will remain same. Control over goods inwards. Inventory records are supported over the counts. Control over the dispatches and goods outward. Adequate steps should be taken to identify all the inventories for which provisions may be required to know their realizable values. Okay. And also you should take into consideration inventory level should be controlled so that materials are available when in need. Okay, inventory is the most important thing in the organization. Once if you do not maintain the inventory properly, then you can then there will be complete stoppage of the work. So in inventory level you will have the order level also, which will play an important role. So once you as we saw in the earlier slides, you had something known as a reorder level, right? So in your inventory level you have something known as a maximum level of inventory, you will have a minimum level of inventory, and you will have a reorder level of inventory. So once it leads the reorder level, the below level the level below reorder level is your danger level, which shows that any time the work can stop because there is no inventory. So because of, in order to by taking into consideration these levels, you should make sure you are controlling the inventories so that there is no disruption in your work. Now, control procedures over inventory. What is a control procedure over inventory? You have the first one, that is approval of control of documents. Now, approval of control of documents is nothing but your issuing from inventory should be made only properly by authorized requisitions. Okay, and your review of damaged, obsolete, and slow moving inventory should be carried out, and write-offs should be authorized. Everything that you are taken into consideration should be authorized. Next, you have arithmetical accuracy. In your arithmetical accuracy, you should make sure that you should ensure that all the receipts are issued, recorded on inventory cards, cross-referenced to the appropriate GRN or requisition document. Okay, and also the costing department should allocate direct and overhead costs to value of work in progress. Okay, your inventory is basically, it is your work in progress, your raw materials, your finished goods, everything as such. Okay, now you should make sure that the costing department should allocate the direct and overhead cost to value of work in progress according to the stage of completion which is reached. Okay, based on the stage of completion which is reached, you should value the work in progress also. Next one, you have control accounts. In your control accounts is basically total inventory records may be maintained and integrated with main accounting system. Okay, all the records will be maintained by the main accounting system. If they should reconcile to detailed inventory records and discrepancies investigated. Now next, you have comparison of assets to records. In your comparison of assets to records is basically inventory level should be periodically checked against the records by person independent of the stores, personnel and material differences which are investigated. You need to continuously investigate, and the person who is appointed should control, maintain and continuously check the records. And it should be done at least once in a year. Maximum and minimum inventory level, as I told you all, it has to be predetermined, it has to be set in advance, and this has to be maintained and continuously reviewed. Okay, reorder quantity should be predetermined and regular reviewed for adequacy also. Now next one, you have access to assets and records. In your access to assets and records, separate centers should be identified at which goods are held. Okay, you have something known as warehouses and everything as such. So you should make sure that different different centers are set in order to maintain this particular inventories. You should also make sure that deliveries of goods from suppliers should pass through inward section, goods inward section to the stores. All goods should pass through stores, and also these stores these goods should be recorded and checked once they are received. Now, inventory should also be held in the location so they are safe from damage or theft. So whichever location these inventories are held in, they should be identified, and they should be identified in their location, and they should be stored in a very safe manner so that they do not have any chances of getting damaged, or they do not have any threat of theft. All inventory lines should be identified and they should be held together. Access to the store should be also restricted. The access to the stores will only be done by the people who are in charge of it, not by everyone else. Now next you have significant deficiency in internal control. In your significant deficiencies in your internal control, here a significant deficiency is basically a combination of deficiencies, okay, in internal control. They depend not only whether a misstatement has occurred, but they also depend on the likelihood of the occurrence of these particular deficiencies. For example, deficiencies leading to material misstatements. As we all know, in auditing, in terms of internal control, you tend to make material misstatements, right? That you tend to enter into, there's a duplication of entry and anything as such. So this is a particular deficiency which is leading to material misstatement. Susceptibility of loss and fraud and assets of financial statements. You can suspect loss and fraud in assets, okay, wrong including of assets, because most of the time the asset might not be even available in the company. Subjectivity and complexity of determining estimated amounts such as fair value or current value. Okay, what is the fair value of the asset and what is the current value of the asset? Volume of activity that has occurred or could occur. Now what is the activity that is going to occur, or what is the what will be occurred in the future? The interaction of deficiency with other factors in the internal control. These are few examples for the significant deficiencies in the internal control. Now next you have what are the indicators of deficiencies in the internal control. Now what can be the indicator for you to know if there are any deficiencies in the internal control is basically evidence of ineffective aspects of control environment. Under this, you have potential interest in certain financial transactions which may not be scrutinized correctly by those charged in governance. Now, these people who are in charge and who are in governance, they will not scrutinize the reports or the financial transactions effectively. Identification of management frauds. These are the indicators what will indicate the deficiencies. So the identification of management fraud is also one indication. Management failure to implement appropriate action on identifies deficiencies, okay. Absence of risk assessment process. You do not have a risk assessment process in the organization, so which will in turn lead to a deficiency. Evidence of ineffective risk assessment process. You do not have a particular process to identify your risk also. Restate evidence of ineffective response to identified risk and restatements of previously issued financial statements. You do not have the supporting documents for the statements which are for the financial statements also. Evidence of management's inability to oversee the preparations of the financial statements. You do not the management does not have the ability to see if there is any error in the preparations of the financial statements. Now next you have communication deficiencies. Communication deficiencies in internal control. Now what is this communication deficiencies in internal control is basically communicating significant deficiencies in writing to those charged with governance, which will reflect the importance of these matters and assess those charged with governance in fulfilling their oversight responsibilities. You are these people who are responsible should identify the deficiencies and should communicate the deficiencies before and in case before the situation going worse, they should take appropriate actions and they should control it, okay. Regardless of the timing of written communication of significant deficiencies, the auditor may communicate this orally in the first instance to the management and when appropriate to those charged with the governance. Now it is the auditor's duty to actually actually communicate these particular deficiencies, identify these deficiencies and communicate these deficiencies so that necessary actions will be taken into consideration, and you can also minimize the material misstatement. So thank you girls, we are done with your chapter 3, that is internal control. We shall move on to your chapter 4, that is audit evidence. Thank you so much girls.